Okay, thank you. Okay, I've just started. Let me share the page here. Can you see my screen, guys? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's get going. So this is the not well. As a reminder, this is our the schedule of our meetings. Reminded that we still have two to go. And the agenda for today is Aaron will start with OAUTH 2.1, and Torsten will later talk about the introspection slide document. That's our agenda now. Aaron, do you want to share from your side, or do you want me to share the slides?
I can try to share from here. Yep.
Okay.
Give me a
Okay.
second.
Stop sharing.
Great. I guess I'll jump right in then. So, hi everybody, I'm Aaron Parecki from Okta. I'm here to talk about OAuth 2.1. This is an effort that we started at the last IETF 106, and there's been a couple of updates since then, but mostly I want to get everybody up to speed on this effort. So the idea with OAuth 2.1 is that it is a summary of, it is a consolidation of all of the current core specs around OAuth 2. So OAuth 2 is split up into a whole bunch of different documents based on the progress that's been made since it was published originally in 2012, including the native apps best current practice, as well as the addition of Pixie. There's the in-progress browser-based apps best current practice and the in-progress security best current practice as well, which defines a bunch of tighter behavior around OAuth 2 for both clients and servers. There's also the bearer tokens, which was split out into its own RFC when it was originally published. And of course, in practice, that's pretty much all anybody's been using. So the idea with OAuth 2.1 is to start from the beginning, start from 6749, play these RFCs in order, and what you get at the end of them is what's then captured in this new document. So you look at what's described across all these RFCs and best current practices, you essentially end up with two grant types that are defined: authorization code along with Pixie, as well as the client credentials grant type. The security best current practice is taking out the password flow. It's also taking out the implicit flow, and it also requires, well, very nearly requires Pixie on the authorization code flow. So it also defines a couple of other behaviors, such as exact redirect URI matching by the authorization server. The security BCP removes the use of bearer tokens and query strings. It has some tighter requirements around refresh tokens, and then yeah, these two legacy grants are omitted from the draft. So 2.1 is basically the collection of the current state of the art of OAuth 2 in the most secure way possible. It is explicitly not meant to define any new behavior, which was one of the original design goals we went into it with. So rather than trying to be more like proactive or pushing things forward in terms of some of the other new extensions that are coming out, we wanted to focus on just creating a new starting point for that kind of work. So there's some pretty cool stuff I'm really excited about that's coming out as extensions. Those are not being rolled into OAuth 2.1 because they are still very experimental and not actually widely supported or deployed. So this was a couple of weeks ago, I think it was early March, we published the first draft and sent an email to the list sharing that, which was which we created since the original brainstorming of this in November. Since that first draft, we've had some feedback on the list, and thanks to Brian for a nice detailed review on that. I have gone ahead and made a couple of the changes. That's a couple of changes that's been discussed on the list since then. So mainly, there was a section around HTTP redirects in the security VCP that I guess we just forgot to bring in the first place. So that's now been added. There was a bunch of editorial typo fixes that have been made as well. There's also now some of the references have been fixed since things like HTTP have also evolved since 2012. So a lot of the references that were in the original documents are now updated to the more modern equivalents of those references. So there's a couple of open questions that I have just to start off with that we can discuss, and there's a couple of other details on the list that we could that probably need some further discussion as well. There's so a couple of new things that have come out since 2012, things like dynamic client registration and authorization server metadata. While we don't want to require those in the core, it's probably still a good idea to at least reference them as optional ways to do those things. So client registration, like there is a client registration section in OAuth 2.0 in the core RFC. It mainly just says this is out of scope of the draft. So we could at least reference that there are some RFCs that talk about different ways to do these as optional. There's another interesting one, which is whether redirect URIs should require TLS, of course, except for localhost or non-HTTP ones. And that it was originally not required because in 2010 and 2012, it was a much more of a hurdle of a burden to deploy TLS. So that's something that has also changed in the environment since then. However, that would be a change from the core. There's another comment on the list about. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Do you want to take questions because I see Justin in the queue? Do you want to take questions
sure.
now? Or do?
Yeah,
Justin.
Yeah, not to derail the presentation, but I just wanted to say really quick that, sorry, this is Justin Richer, that dynamic client registration and AS metadata, in addition to defining their respective protocols, they also effectively define a de facto object model for clients and authorization servers respectively. And so at least referencing those under that context, in addition to the functionality that they provide, I believe would be a good thing for the group to consider.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that would look like in the draft, but that probably is a good idea to at least make people aware of them, since one of the goals of this document is to give people a clearer starting point getting into the OAuth space. So having places to go to as clear launching off points to go find the information they're looking for is definitely beneficial. So I'm definitely in favor of that.
Torsten.
Thank you. Torsten Lodderstedt speaking. First of all, I support what Justin just said regarding client registration AS metadata, because it provides the conceptual model for talking about relationships and representation of data about clients and services. And regarding the should for TLS and redirect URIs, RFC 6749 already required TLS for redirect URIs in case the flow is being used for identity providing, identity federation use cases. And I don't see any reason not to require TLS on redirect URIs in the current version of OAuth.
And Torsten, while you're here, can you remind me what the security BCP says around that? Does it make any additional requirements around redirect URIs?
I'm not sure. I think we assumed that's already a requirement. That's why we did not add anything to the spec, to the BCP. Daniel, you're on the call as well. Can you confirm?
Yes, I don't think we have anything on specific on TLS now.
Do you see any reason not to require HTTPS?
No, I'm all for TLS everywhere.
I think our assumption was it's already required, or there is a basis consensus around that HTTPS is the way to go. OpenID Connect already does it, except the exceptions that you already listed.
Great. Then, yep, that sounds great. I'm happy to go ahead with that plan as long as there's no arguments for non-TLS, obviously, except for localhost. Okay, anything else on this, or should I continue?
The queue is empty, so keep going.
Great. So there's another sort of tricky one that came up in some of the discussions around the definition of confidential clients. And there's a couple of different sentences across the spread of documents that kind of approach the definition differently. So the sentence at the top is a requirement for authorization servers to consider the confidence in the client's identity when deciding whether it can use things like the client credentials grant type, which is a statement about the client's identity rather than just whether or not it can authenticate. So I guess my question here is kind of going back to the original definition of confidential clients. What was the actual intended definition of that? Is it the identity assurance of a client, or is it the ability for a client to authenticate? The main difference here is if you imagine a situation that uses dynamic client registration and it's like an iPhone app that's downloaded, it would first wake up and go register, which would give it a client secret, which it can use to authenticate as that instance. However, there is no assurance of that client's identity because anybody can make that registration request and the registration request will be unauthenticated. So that's the sort of situation. That's the difference between the identity assurance and ability to authenticate. And I see Dick on the queue, so go ahead.
The intent was, could the client keep a secret, right? The confidentiality. And so it doesn't really, it is confusing how that maps to a dynamic client. I mean, a dynamic client can keep the secret.
So if the intent was just, if the intent is just to keep a secret, then that sentence at the top doesn't necessarily fit in with that definition. Then there's some more people on the queue. Let's.
Yeah, George.
Sure. Yeah, George Fletcher. I think I guess two things. I agree with Dick, right? The original intent was, can you protect a secret? Can you not protect a secret? And when we, even in 6749, when we talked about dynamic clients, right, we talked about because that secret is instance issued or potentially created locally in the trusted enclave of the device, right? If you're doing PKI, then the device can keep the secret, right? And that was sort of the main thing. Whether the dynamic registration itself was an impersonation attack or the valid client, as Justin will probably say after me, there are ways that you can attempt to protect that. And I think there are growing capabilities with, at least within mobile devices, to do things like device attestation and potentially app signing attestation that actually would allow you to put some identity assurance there. But I think as it relates to confidential client specifically, the original intent was really just, can you protect that secret?
Okay, Justin.
Justin Richer, and there's a difference between protecting secrets at runtime and protecting secrets at configuration time. And 6749 doesn't do the best at differentiating those two, whereas the dynamic registration specs, we have a little bit more experience to articulate that a little bit better, wherein they effectively allow you to turn what would normally be a public client into a confidential client, because you're now changing a secret that would have been issued at configuration time into something that, by necessity of the nature of the client, into something that is issued bound and protected at runtime. And George is absolutely right in that when you're in that situation, then attesting to the identity of the client application happens at a different layer. It doesn't happen at the layer of the client secret. It happens at the layer of when you issue the client secret or equivalent.
Thorsten.
Speaking. Yeah, I have to agree with Justin as well. So from my perspective, we need to distinguish the fact that there is an authentication, the client can authenticate, and what policy an AS may associate with a certain client. When RFC 6749 was published, basically our model was, if the client has a secret, then typically the application has gone through some vetting process. So we know what application that is, what partner that is, and we can associate a certain policy and certain authorization permission with that client. It has gone with dynamic client registration. So we clearly need to distinguish, can we recognize a certain client using a secret? That's one, that's authentication assurance. And what policy can we associate? How many trust can we put on that client, which is identity assurance? I think we need to really differentiate that. I mean, the text you should see this on the screen, I think was written by myself, and I tried to somehow get across that just having a secret is not enough, because depending on the way the client secret is being provisioned, you need to differentiate when meeting access control decisions. So we need to distinguish both aspects, I think, in OAuth 2.1.
Phil. Are you there? Can you hear us? Okay, we'll circle back to Phil. Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the description of the different types of clients is one of the things that causes ongoing confusion for developers. And when we published 6049, as Justin said, we tried to clean up those distinctions in dynamic client registration. Yes, you can't hide a secret in a .exe file, but you can obtain one dynamically from one. So if those distinctions can be added to this draft without changing the meanings of things on the wire, that might help people better understand the landscape.
Phil, can you hear us?
What did you say?
Phil, I'm asking for Phil if he's still on the call because he was in the queue. Is Phil on the call? Can you hear us?
No. Okay.
Okay, he is not. Okay, let's keep going. Thanks. Oh, he's having some technical difficulties there. Okay. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So thanks for all that. That helps clear things up.
Question. Sorry.
He's saying it is a question of uniqueness more than authentication or assurance. So yeah, I think this makes sense, and I like the idea of making the idea of the client's identity separate and call that more explicitly. So I will try to work on that. So I will try to make sure that the confidential client definition is strictly around whether it can maintain a secret and use a secret, regardless of how it got that secret, and then save the identity discussion for a different part of the spec. So I think that'll be great. And thanks for the suggestions for looking at dynamic client registration for some language there. Great. So that's really the only things I wanted to discuss right now on this call. Those are the things that stood out to me as some of the current issues. Oh, I see Dick just jumped on the queue. Go ahead.
I was going to let you finish off what you were saying there, Aaron. I was going to sort of move up to a higher level. So go ahead and finish.
Oh, sure. Well, no, that was all I really wanted to say. Really, it's just like what's next. I think there's obviously still some editorial work to clean up the language, make sure that it's not too much of a patchwork and does flow a little better, because it is mostly text copied from all of the existing RFCs. So there's some work there. And then do we want to actually bring this into the working group to make it a working group item?
So on that topic, when the meeting that kicked off us creating this document was, there seemed to be a lot of confusion and apprehension about what was in or what wasn't in this document. And so maybe we can open up the questions to be around, do people have concerns about the contents of what is in, or concerns about what is not in this document?
Sure.
Okay, Mike?
Sure. As we talked about in person and on some of the other related calls, OAUTH has been extended by more than documents in this working group. This working group defined an extension process using IANA registries for extensions to become part of the spec that's used. And OpenID Connect is one of these. There's a number of others that profiles of OpenID or of OAuth, including UMA and some other things. And I believe that this document needs to be written recognizing that what's in the registries is also part of OAuth. For instance, defined types in the registry right now. There's a bunch of additional client authentication methods, and we should be careful not to remove the ability, or apparently remove the ability to use these safe extensions, which are also part of the OAuth ecosystem.
Mike, Dick?
Fully agree with that, Mike. And I think in the latest draft, I don't know if you took it out, Aaron, but you had in the draft, and I didn't notice it until later, was that there's IANA considerations, but there isn't any IANA considerations because all of those things are registered. So we should definitely include references to the various registries around OAuth. And Mike, if you have suggestions for how to reference other documents, definitely open to that. So we don't want to, we definitely want to point to people about things that are known now that extend OAuth in this document, so people know that these other things do work with it. If that's capturing what your comment was, Mike.
It's part of it, but you know, some of the earlier slides were talking about there's only going to be one response type defined, and you're removing a few, but you're not talking about, or you're completely silent on the use of some of the other safe response types like ID token code.
Yeah, so let me address that one. So just like 6749 only defined a few response type, and then there were many extensions that were created to do things better. The same is true here. So the only response type defined is authorization code which also includes the language from Pixie. And then it still says it can be extended. So the extension points are still in there. How I think that might, the one thing that might change in terms of some of the extensions is that for example, response type code ID token would then be a completely new extension of the framework rather than an extension of the authorization code grant. Because if it's not doing Pixie, it's not extending the authorization code grant that's described in 2.1, it's extending the entire framework. So the mechanism is still unchanged in OpenID Connect extension. It's just extending it from a different point, if that makes sense. And that language of allowing extensions is still in this draft.
I think this is in the right direction. Some of the apprehensions that I and others expressed could create confusion in the marketplace that's not intended by making it appear that stuff that already works and is safe is being deprecated. So I think for some stuff that we know is safe, like, for instance, protecting against CSRF with nonce rather than with state, we should, as in the other draft you're working on, Aaron, explicitly say some of these things that we're not ruling these out. People get it wrong. You know, you can through the review process and discussions that might allow kind of confusion, because we've got a good ecosystem. We don't want to cast it in doubt. In fact, we have one of the
I'm trying to cut. So
ecosystems.
okay, we're running out of time. Justin, you had a comment. Do you want to say it on the mic here? And I'm gonna cut the mic after Justin.
There were several people ahead of me. So, go ahead.
No,
I think it was just Torsten.
Sorry, I missed Torsten. Go ahead, Torsten. Sorry.
No problem, as long as other people taking care of me. So this is Torsten Larsen speaking. So just as an impulse, I think we as a working group need to decide what we want to achieve with OAuth 2.1. And whether we want to establish a new basis for OAuth going forward, or we just want to package things together that pre-existed. I mean, in Security BCP, we came up with new guidelines and made sure that all possible combinations, for example, for CSRF and code protection were being mentioned. Whereas in the OAuth 2.1 draft, we explicitly say code plus Pixie is required to be supported by the AS. From my perspective, it creates a new, clean, and simple basis. And I would like to start from that and not weakening the language by saying, you can do it that way, but hey, there are other ways. You can use that mechanism or that mechanism or that mechanism, because that, from my perspective, creates confusion.
Yeah, I agree.
That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Justin.
I mean, yeah, Tristan covered it. Plus one to all of that. The goal of this document should be to create a new baseline, not to explain all of the things that you can buy on the OAuth 2 menu. And also, anybody who is doing OAuth 2.0 can still do 2.0. I think that we're publishing a 2.1 and then everybody's going to turn off their OAuth 2.0 stuff out of fear is ridiculous.
Sorry, guys. I cut the mic. I think we need to move on to that next one. I think this topic will be discussed on the mailing list to continue there, and we will call for adoption to this draft on the mailing list. Just a quick question: anybody has any problem with calling for adoption on this draft? Any objection? Okay, then we'll do that on the mailing list and make sure everyone is comfortable with this. Thank you, guys. Okay, Torsten.
So Rifat, this is Roman. Sorry, I was having difficulty finding the mute button. I mean, this isn't an observation on the wording in this specific draft, but again, as we're talking about next version of OAuth 2.0, calling it OAuth 2.1, I would just guide everyone to think about what we're actually chartered to do, and what we're trying to kind of do in the current chartering box is to improve security and interoperability. So that's the eye on the prize for me, unless we've rechartered.
Okay, and I need to look at the charter and see if there is any conflict with this. So yeah, and I haven't looked at it for a while. So yeah, I'll take a look, and maybe Hannes and I will look at it and see if there is an issue there. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
May I ask you to show my slides this time?
Sure.
There are not so many of them.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Second, yeah, no problem.
What I'm going to present to you is the latest version of the JWT introspection response draft. JWT response draft already was in ISG, or is already formally is in ISG review. But we made a significant change. I'm gonna present to you now. So can you please flip to the next slide? So first of all, what is this all about? The draft introduces an additional response mode for OAuth token introspection, and this response mode is a JOT that can be signed, optional, encrypted, but essentially conveys the same payload as token introspection. And the main use case for that is to allow non-repudiation if an AS provides token data to a certain resource server. And on top of that, it provides application level security for this kind of use cases. Next, please. As I said, we did a change recently. And I have to admit, I forgot to publish the draft and just realized, I think on Saturday, that we hadn't published it, and that's why I published 09 on weekend. What we did is we previously we had all the data about the introspected token and the metadata of the JOT representing the introspection response in the same JOT. And this caused some discussion in the ISG review and also on the list. And yeah, in the end, we decided, also based on suggestions from some working group members, including Justin and Taka, to move the data of the introspected tokens into a new top-level claim that we called token_introspection. And it allows us to separate the claims from the carrier JOT that represents the introspection response from the actual data of the introspected tokens. So if we take a look on the next slide, you see how the resource server requests a JOT-based introspection response. We didn't change that. It's a new media type application token introspection plus JWT. And in the response, you can see where we did the changes. On the left-hand side, you see the header of the token, which remains unchanged. And on the right-hand side, you can see we have that token introspection element, and this contains all the data that you would see in a traditional OAuth token response. So whether the token is active and all the other claims, and the other top-level claims in that JOT are related to the JOT that represents the introspection response. So for example, if you would introspect a certain access token several times, data within the token introspection element would be the same, with the only exception if the access token is expired, the token introspection would only contain the member active false, whereas the claims in the top level container especially the IAT and potential NBF and JTI, would change, because those are the elements that characterize the JOT. Is just the bearer, the signed bearer of the response, and this allows to really distinguish this different data. So, for example, one use case is the IAT in the top level element allows the RS to prove at what point in time the AS attested a certain access token to be still active, whereas the IAT in the token introspection container tells us when the underlying access token was issued. Yeah, that's basically is the change that we did. And that's go ahead, Rifat. You had the right intuition. So there's just one question. What's next? I mean, this is a normative change. Obviously, it's a significant change. That's, from my perspective, the most significant change we ever met since we have been working on that draft. I assume we wanna send that through at least a working group review again before we go on for publication.
Yeah, I think so. I think we need probably to get it back into the. Oh, I see Roman's trying to chime in here. So, Roman, do you wanna?
Yeah, I was going to say I strongly endorse that approach. This seems like a very big change. It's in ISG review now. I feel like we should punt this back to the working group, do another working group last call, like was just suggested.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So, is there any question that anybody has on the draft, on the latest change? And
see if anybody is in the queue here. Chat here. Justin.
I just wanted to reiterate what I said on the list, and that this change removes a lot of the reservations that I had about this draft in terms of misinterpretation of the response and misuse of the claims within the token as a token, and also confusion of the various bits that can go inside of a JOT body and therefore into the JOT and introspection registries.
George.
Hey, George Fletcher, is the expectation then that token introspections can now have additional behavior more explicitly defined, such as expiry? And I'm assuming you would also get double JTIs, potentially one for the carrier and one for the token that was introspected.
George, I don't really get what you mean with the expiration. The first part of your statement.
Okay, let me address that. Right, I want to say that the validity of this token introspection is good for 2 minutes, right? And if you get the token, because it gives you actually a caching mechanism, right? If you allow for the addition of the expiry JOT claim at the carrier level as a way to indicate to the relying party, effectively, you can cache this token introspection for this period of time. Right. So if you want to then have a centralized authorization model and you're looking at risk factors, right, and you know what because of the audience or whatever, what the token is being introspected for, right, you might be able to say, okay, for this particular use, you can cache it for, 5 minutes. For this other use, you can only cache it for 1. Or for the, $10,000 bank transfer, you can't cache it at all, right? It's effectively a one-time use token and must be expired immediately. Like you must introspect using the real token on every call.
I think that's a interesting idea we need to elaborate on. I would assume instinctively for a long-living access token that makes a lot of sense, where you could use the expiration claim in the top level JOT to do exactly that, to force to allow caching, but also have a certain frequency where the resource server needs to obtain a fresh copy of the introspection response. I'm not quite sure whether we'd use that for high-risk transactions, because in that case, I would most likely work with access tokens with a very limited expiration. So the access token itself would but I think the idea is very interesting, and it's now possible with that structure. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Philip Skokan, OAUTH here. I like the suggestion. I like the idea. Just a question to George, maybe. With the presence of an EXP claim, how would I indicate that the resource server needs to call every single time? I honestly can't think of putting the current timestamp in there because it means it's already expired. And I wouldn't put a 0 in there. And then if I just don't include the claim, the spec needs to be clear on this.
Great point. I don't know that I have an answer for you. It was just, since we have the sort of outside wrapper and it is a JOT, my general question was really around, can you throw any valid JOT claim in the carrier value, and do we need to talk about those? So you're right. I don't know how we would do it you were suggesting off the top of my head.
I hope we already have text in that. We do not recommend to use the JTI in the carrier, simply because it doesn't make sense for replay detection. So the JTI in the token introspection container should be the one to be used for replay detection. We have text on that.
Yeah, and additionally, it actually calls out being able to use all the other claims that are already in the registry for expiration and validity, mechanism checks.
Cool.
Justin?
Just wanted to point out that in 7662, it does talk about caching in terms of using HTTP response headers to help the RS determine how long to cache things. And so if we are adding additional mechanisms or even suggesting the ability of additional mechanisms to control caching inside of this container, we just at least need to mention that. I don't think it needs to be particularly complex, but I think George is right that with things like that, I do think that it's an interpretation that we might not have necessarily meant.
Aaron?
I wanted to ask a quick question. Is it, with this addition of this sort of wrapper or container object, is it then possible to use this same response to introspect tokens that are not necessarily JOTs themselves? So the token introspection document nested here could be something with a completely different vocabulary?
Basically, token introspection can always be used to introspect tokens that are not JOTs, and that's true in that case as well. So the assumption of the draft is not that your introspected token has a certain format. We just use a JOT claims in the same way as the original token introspection draft does to convey attributes, claims of that access token.
I see what you're saying. So the claims that are in this token introspection response, are those specifically defined in this document, or could they be other claims if an AS wanted to return other vocabularies?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
okay. I think that would be that's another good argument for doing this, for the separation, which is that it allows
the text
it to be used more flexible.
Yeah, what the draft currently says is that you can use all the JOTs defined in the respective INA registry, but clearly in a local scenario, in a concrete deployment, you can also use all the claims that are not defined in the INA registry. That makes sense.
Anybody else? George?
George here. I think I was next, but I fully put it in the chat, right? The current token introspection spec defines some explicit claims for putting common data, and you can extend it to return anything you want. So my expectation is the claims inside the token introspection object are the same that would have been returned from the token introspection endpoint if you weren't asking for a JOT response. And in that context, it's extensible to whatever data you want to return there.
That makes perfect sense, and that I think is another great argument for this separation and pulling it out in this new document form.
Okay. Any other comments? Anybody has any questions? I think the queue is empty right now. Okay. So Thorsten, do you want to wrap up then? Anything else that you want to mention?
I just wanna say what I understood. So we're gonna send that through a review in the working group again. So which means we go through the whole process again, review, working call, and then IC or
yes.
What?
So
Okay.
that's the plan. Yeah. Working
Okay.
group last call. We'll get whatever feedback. You will update it, and if they are happy, then we ship it again. Otherwise, we'll revision. Just the usual stuff, right?
Yeah, sounds great after 2.5 years. Yeah. Yeah, but it's fine. Okay.
Okay.
I'll hit the buttons right after the meeting's over.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. So, go ahead, Dick. You wanna say something here? So you wanna go back talking about OAuth 2.1? Is that what you want?
No, you just cut the queue. We still have time, and there was people that seemed like they had other comments. So I was thinking we could open the queue up and go back to completing any other discussion on 2.1.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So anybody has any questions, comments about OAuth 2.1? I think Mike, I cut the mic when Mike was in the queue there. So Mike, do you want to chime in back or?
Sure. I was just going to respond to a comment that Justin made about the previous draft that we don't want to have to explain all the extensions. I completely agree with that. You misunderstood what I was saying. What I do we need to say is at least have some blanket statements about many of the extensions are still valid to use, and maybe give an example. We're not cutting off the whole rest of the ecosystem.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Vittorio?
So one thing I wanted to mention again is something that was touched on the list, and it was about enforcing the requirement for having single-use refresh tokens or sender constraints. One thing was that during the discussion, it turned out that sender constraint we considered also confidential clients, but the language wasn't super clear. So I didn't read the latest draft to see whether these clarification was included, but I just wanted to bring it up in case it wasn't. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, which instead was still open in the mailing list, was on whether it's opportune to require to native clients, like public clients that are not SPAs, to use a one-time only or constraint. I wanted to reiterate that I think that for the core spec and not the BCP, it's asking too much. Let's say that that's not transparent for the developers, because the errors that you can get in case you fail to get the new refresh token is complicated. So I think that we should definitely require that for SPAs, but asking for native clients, desktop clients, to also do one time only in the core is too much.
The authors, do you wanna any comments about Vittorio's comment here?
Thorsten speaking here. Vittorio, I'm not quite sure why you think it's okay for to require that for SPAs, but not for native and desktop clients. I mean, beside the fact that I think native and web apps could also use sender constraining, or at least kind of authentication, which also qualifies as sender constraining.
So the reason for which I differentiate between SPAs and mobile clients is mostly attack surface. Let's say that when you are in a browser, there's way more ways of attack you than if you would have, for example, an iOS app which operates in a sandboxed environment where you have some degree of access to the device and there is isolation between applications. So although I see how it's perfectly justifiable to ask to the SPA developer if they really want to deal with tokens in the user agent to have measures to protect the refresh token, I think that that need is not as pronounced when you are an application that operates outside of a browser.
So your assumption is that the risk is much less, is not as high in a desktop or a native application because attack vectors are much more significant in a browser. That's what I'm guessing. What I'm getting.
That's exactly my take.
Okay. Yeah, I need to think about it.
Anybody else? Okay, I think the queue is empty and we are almost out of time. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.